Is there any better feeling than one of your favorite bands releasing a new album almost out of the blue with like very little lead up and just kind of bringing it into the forefront, and especially after such a long stretch without a full length album? Let's just dive into it. Antimai by The Dream. The Dream? Where was that coming from? Let's try that again. Antimai from The Deer Hunter. So, The Deer Hunter, don't think we need too much of an introduction from them, but if you're not in the know, The Deer Hunter is I guess indie progressive rock. I always kind of label them in the modern progressive rock outfits. Like, it sounds very much of the now music. They came onto the scene with their whole Axe series. There are 5 so far within the Axe sequence, and each one doing another chapter in this overarching story. And Casey is not afraid of really pushing the boundaries when it comes to a concept album. He did a full project for the color sequence where he did an EP for each of the colors of the rainbow, including black and white, that then was, you could either, pick them up individually with each color or pick them up as a full length project. And I think they've only really put out one album that didn't include an overarching concept or didn't play a bigger part in a bigger story, which was Migrant in 2013. And it was fine. It was fine. But I always felt like Casey works better in the confines of an overarching concept. And this was found within the Axe, this was found within the color spectrum, and now this is found with Antimai. So coming into this album, it is kind of a continuation from the project that he started last year with the Indigo Child. And I really like how these two projects really do work in tandem with one another. The Indigo Child from last year was an EP/a soundtrack to the short film that Casey had produced, really focusing in on this singular individual, this child from this world, this dystopian kind of futuristic world that, as with most dystopian novels, is pretty thinly veiled metaphor for what we currently have. But I really enjoyed the music and I really enjoyed the presentation. It was a lot more dark in presentation, but also a lot more lush, a lot more I love the overlays of sounds and the blendings of this symphony that Casey was playing with the Indigo Child. It was so different than anything else that he had done up to that point, and I just really, really liked it. And so the following year, here we come to a full-length album of Antimai, which is essentially the atlas to the world that the Indigo Child takes place. So I like how both of these projects really take a different kind of chapter, a different kind of slice of the pie for this overarching setting. It's almost as though J.R.R. Tolkien gave us The Hobbit with this, very singular story of this particular individual, Bilbo Baggins, going off on an adventure. And then very later on, we get the Silmarillion, which is this atlas, this historical document that dictated everything that came before, a lot of the stories that came after, and the world that was Middle-earth. And that is basically what Antimai is. And much like the Silmarillion, people are either going to really, really like this album, or fans of the band might not necessarily connect with it quite as much as they did with the last couple of albums. This album, I really, really love with an asterisk. And I feel like that's kind of my MO whenever I come to The Deer Hunter. It's I really love this album. There's just a little asterisk about it. And the main asterisk for this one is... So the concept of this album, as I mentioned, it's the world of the Indigo Child. It is the world of the Antimai. It really looks at the city-state where it's all these rings, almost like rings of a tree. And I mean, Casey loves trees. We see it a lot in the Axe series. But it's like this ring of a tree where the outer rim of the city-state is the poverty, and the closer you get to the center, you get higher up in the social statings. You got outer ring of 8 being poverty, then industry, low town, middle class, patrol, luxury, nature, and then the center, which is the high tower where everybody rules. In that sense, it's such a great concept where basically each track is a different location. And I'm a huge D&D player. I have 2 games running and I'm the dungeon master for both of them. So world building and creating maps and putting music to the different locations, I immediately fell in love with. I think it's such a brilliant idea of setting an album up. My biggest qualm, though, is that musically and most specifically tonally, there's not a whole lot of difference between Ring 8 of Poverty and Ring 1 of Tower. And there's not a whole lot of variations within it, you know? So, and I mean this mainly tonally. Like, the music that's found within this is very unified. It's very singular. It's very self-contained. And normally I love that. I love when an album has a specific idea and a specific scope for their music, creates a very, I don't want to say rigid, but a very structured way to present their music, and then just play around with the different like limitations that they have set up for themselves to create an extremely unified sit down and listen. And for an album that's just over 50 minutes, I think it works beautifully. But when you're setting up a world where you're trying to showcase the contrasts and the differences between the different sections of the city, where poverty is rampant, where inequality is so astute, I want to have a little bit of variations, maybe, when it comes to the sounds that are on it. And I mean, specifically with the first three of Poverty, Industry, and Lowtown, I felt like they were very, very similar and also very jovial when it comes to that. And I don't think anybody that knows about Poverty would ever link the word jovial to it. It's suffering, it's struggle, it's trying to make ends meet. There are pockets of like joy that is found, but not because of poverty. And it's especially not when you are setting up this whole thing to like say, hey, look, this is where the poverty class is. I was also talking with a fellow reviewer about this album, and they said that this was very much the style of music that like Crash Bandicoot or Banjo-Kazooie or even like Diddy Kong Racing. Now that I heard that, I can't really not see it. You know, especially with the first couple of tracks, Poverty and Industry, and a little bit later on with Patrol. You know, it definitely has that flavor to it. It definitely has that very rhythmic, very astute playfulness when it comes to this almost like funk infused style of music. You know, I really, really actually appreciate this. And I want to start transitioning into things that I really do love about this album, because I love this fun aspect to it. I love this jive, this rhythm aspect to it. And I love that Casey isn't afraid to experiment with new instruments. And I mean, he did quite a bit with the last two albums from the Act series, Act 4 and 5, where he had a full orchestra at his behest. And he's using this whole orchestra now more individually, with a horn section at times, providing, again, the main rhythm section. So I really like that these rhythm sections are overlaid on top of one another so that the drums are more of an accent of the rhythms rather than the rhythmic force about that. And we also get quite a few tracks that are very traditional Deer Hunter tracks. Like, this album does take a lot of risks. It takes a lot of experimentations, but Ring 5, being the middle class, is a very traditional the Deer Hunter tracks. Like, this would fit very nicely on Act 4 or 5. And I mean, if you want to talk about the, Crash Bandicoot or Banjo-Kazooie, look no further than Patrol. Patrol very astutely kind of captures that flavor. It's very fun, very rhythmic, very jazzy funk in that sense, but into a more rockin' territory. I do want to talk about the last three tracks really quickly. Luxury, I thought, was a very interesting track in it being something that was very outside of Casey's comfort zone, and it's starting off almost like Hamilton, the Lin-Manuel Miranda show tune, where it's got like this sing-song rap style starting everything off and bringing in that flavor of this show tune aspect of it. Luxury being the longest track at almost 10 minutes, it has this kind of cut at the midpoint where it goes into almost a completely different song. And conceptually, I really enjoy this because I like how Luxury is being looked at both from a top down, but also from a bottom up point of view. I like how at the beginning of Luxury, it's talking about, I don't understand how anybody that's not in luxury can't just make their way into luxury, and talking from a very ignorant standpoint, basically not recognizing any of the challenges that people that aren't born into luxury have to face that those who are in luxury just don't see, and I really appreciate that Casey is kind of showing a spotlight on that ignorance and being like, hey, you don't know what you're talking about. Because you're born into it doesn't necessarily mean that you deserve it. And I really like how on the second half, it's also coming from like a very personal point of view. You know, so you're looking at luxury from a more of a contextualizing, coming in from a like a full, like, how does it fit in with this world, but also from a very personal point of view from the second half, where it's very intimate. It's much more of a individual point of view, where like one person isn't really any of the cause on this, but they still kind of take responsibility. And I like how they are able to kind of play with the main rhythm section in both of these parts, where the one part is much more astute, very big, bombastic in your face, and the other one's a little bit more intimate, a little bit more subdued. It reminds me of one of those instruments that King Crimson was using quite a bit on Lark's Tongue, where it's like a handheld instrument with picks that make the percussive sounds on it. Really, really enjoyed that one. The final two rings, Nature and Tower, I really actually enjoyed, and I like how it's almost mirrored for how Poverty has Industry and then Low Town, and then the other side has Tower, which holds all the power, and Nature basically being this lost refuge that people are artificially keeping alive so that they can still enjoy it, because they're so like insular in this city-state that they would never be able to experience nature outside. And that's actually addressed in Tower, where they're like, yeah, we can do whatever we want to this planet. We can use up all the resources, but we still have this little packet, like this little oasis that's just for us to enjoy. That juxtaposition of this very selfish use of power, I mean... Yeah, that's not a metaphor for something. It's just interesting that it ends so abruptly with Tower, as though it's like... you know, a movie that just kind of lost the last reel, and we're still waiting for the final reel to be brought forth. But even still, my enjoyment of the album does kind of wax a little bit by the end, just with Nature and Tower being so closely similar in terms of mood to Industry and Poverty, which I've already mentioned at the beginning. So it takes a little bit of the punch out when the same tones, the same moods are met, but I mean, the lyrics are still very poignant. In the end, Antimai was a very interesting album, and one that I had a lot of fun dissecting and a lot of fun diving into. You know, I've been listening to this almost nonstop for the past week and a half, and just been loving every minute of it. Yeah, this is the kind of album that I love to really digest and sink my teeth into. Yeah, so let's just get right into the rating here. Let's say that Antimai from the Deer Hunter is one that I would absolutely pick up in physical format. After waiting so long for new Deer Hunter, with All Is As All Should Be and the Indigo Child being their two EPs leading up to this album, with so much of the legacy behind them, I think this is a great way to continue the Deer Hunter music while trying different things and kind of almost saying, yeah, we're kind of taking a quick hiatus from the Act series. We'll see if we'll get Act 6. Yeah, I don't know if this would necessarily be the great jumping into point. As I mentioned, there's a few issues that I have with this album. If you love an album that's very unified in terms of the sound, I think you're going to really dig this one. If you love an album with a very crystal clear and very unique concept, you're going to really like this album. Yeah, I still have a few qualms with the marriage of those two ideologies. I still think this is a fantastic work. I think Casey definitely knocked it out of the park with this one. And I personally just loved it, you know, and I'm going to have an even more fun time diving into this as the months go on. So yeah, that's what I've got for Antimai from the Deer Hunter. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you have the same qualms that I did? Or do you have different qualms? Or do you have no qualms at all? Do you think this is a great album? Let me know about all that by commenting down below. I just realized you can have qualms with an album and still think it's a great album. You know, I just want to put that point out there. But yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.